Hey there, comic fans. My name is Walt. Welcome to my channel, or welcome back if you know it. If you don't, I'm reviewing comics. I'm trying to deconstruct them to find out what makes them work, what good storytelling in comics is. And this is a prime example of the 80s. It's an horror anthology named Taboo, released by Stephen Bissett, legendary artist, on Swamp Thing, on Tyrant, on many other things. And as you can see, this is like as edgy as it gets for 80s comics, but also as edgy as it gets for mainstream comics in general. I mean, this is not an underground book. This was sold in comic shops. And you have like the two biggest taboos in Western culture. It's violence, also like a bit of a sexualized, fetishized violence against little children on the front cover, and bam, the Holocaust on the back cover. How shocking can it get inside? Let's find out. Okay, so let me say a few introductory words. I have talked about my interest in the horror genre in previous videos. This is like a series of videos where I try to deconstruct what works in this particular genre in comics. And I have talked about the differences between horror and horror because it's not one thing, it's many, many things. And I would differentiate between two main directions in horror. One is the simulation of an existential threat. Basically, every monster-oriented horror falls into this category. It simulates the ancient fear that every human has of being eaten by the lion, and the monster is nothing else but this threat. And the monster can be the ghost, can be a big animal, can be something very weird, supernatural, unexplainable, but it's always the fear of death. And then there is a different kind of horror, a second category, meta category of horror, which, well, you could name it intellectual horror, not so much because it's for intellectuals, but it's maybe mainly made by people who have an interest in philosophy. They look at fear in a more reflective manner. And this particular brand of horror is more diffused, it's indirect. It affects your brain more than your guts. It scans and reprograms your thought patterns. It's the fear of getting crazy, of losing your moral compass, of losing your ability to distinguish between real and imagined, between good and bad. And if you can't distinguish between good and bad anymore, if you've lost your morals, then you get very close to this magazine, because this is what they're trying to do. What underground culture always tries to do is to challenge the moral code that is prevailing in the particular moment. The 80s were famously 70s, well, starting in the 60s, but in the 80s there was kind of a culmination of this hyper-provocative, taboo-breaking storytelling. I was very eager to finally read this magazine. I have it for years in my collection, and this is the last deviation before we get into the reviews. There are two big motivations for me to do this channel. One is I have a large collection of comics, things that I was interested in when I bought them, but I just didn't find the time to read it all. And yeah, it's making me accountable now through video making. And secondly, I don't want just to read them, but I'm a storyteller myself, so I want to do more than that. I want to deconstruct them, to find out what makes them work or not work, as much as I can go. I'm not a cartoonist. This is not cartoonist kayfabe, but I'm a storyteller. So I can at least try to see what kind of stories work best in comics. All right. So I hope you're not bored already. Let's get into the trenches and see what's happening there. This starts extremely promising. When you look at this table of contents, it's Clive Barker. Well, it's only the introduction, but still. Then you have Stephen Bissett, the publisher himself. S. Clay Wilson, Alan Moore, Charles Fess, Charles Burns, Eddie Campbell, Chester Brown. I mean, this is the Champions League of comics making in the 80s. If you don't get the reference, the Champions League in Europe is the highest league for football aficionados. So you get into the groove with Clive Barker. He tells you a little bit how he sees horror, that he warns us basically to not get too intellectual, too heady. Don't forget your guts. Don't forget the dirty. There was like one very nice line that I wanted to underline for you here. Let us not neglect the forbidden. Let us not sophisticate ourselves out of the cheap thrill and chill of it. The story told for perversity's sake, and all the better for that. The image created because an artist gets tired of reasons sometimes and wants to dredge up some picture he's been haunted by and parade it like a new tattoo. Well, this is one of the shortest and nicest manifestos that I've read. I think this holds true for a lot of filmmaking too, and art in general. There is a tendency now to over dramatize everything and structurize it in a way that it becomes easily digestible. Just watch every Netflix show. It's big data, and big data tells you how to lay out the plot points and everything. But sometimes, creating something surprising and eerie and strange is not doable if you play by the book. Here, by the way, two very impressive drawings by Clive Barker. I didn't know that he's also a very talented artist, which makes me double envious. All right. This is also quite nice. We get an introduction page or two sometimes regarding every creator. And sometimes the introduction is almost as long as the story itself. Those are like 2 pages. S. Clay Wilson is an underground artist from the 60s. He started in the late 60s. I'm not an expert in underground comics, and I have to be frank, I'm not super fond of underground comics in general. Of course, I've checked out Crumb and Co. It's not my kind of style. I acknowledge that it's very capably drawn, but I'm not in love with it. The story is fine. It's about 2 guys who kill some kittens because this dead something in the water tells them to do so. That was a nice idea. So some dead body tells them do that. They do it, and then they transform into kittens themselves, and the next creeps show up about to kill them. It's a nice moral tale, right? So it's a cool introduction. It's a nice short get into the mood. This is gonna be weird. Alan Moore. We don't need introductions on Alan Moore. So this is a neat little story about this woman who has a daytime job. She's working all day. She's a loner. We don't know if it's because she's physically handicapped. It's hinted upon, but I'm not sure. Maybe she's just like a lonesome person. And weird things happen to her. She witnesses a suicide. She's mostly at home, in front of the television. And you will see the television plays an important role in this anthology. I think it's just the 80s, The television had a strange fascination for many people then, many creators. Yes, and on the TV, if you've seen Videodrome, it's exactly what's happening here. She sees a weird show, kind of a sadist show. We don't know, is it real or not? Is it in her head? Is she getting crazy? And of course, she starts to merge with this show. She imagines herself being one of the candidates, and she's getting crazier by page. I feel that I've read this story before, and like I said, there is Cronenberg's Videodrome. It's not super original, which is a relief because we all think that Alan Moore is such a genius, but of course he's just a storyteller, and nobody can be super inventive all the time. So this was not super successful, I would say. The art is fine, but the story itself felt very much like an anthology story. You know, that's the thing with anthologies. They're a mixed bag, and this next story, when you have like this hardcore cover, right? And you have this even more hardcore back cover, which, I mean, I wasn't sure that it's the Holocaust, but it is. Dawn at the Crematorium by Rolf Stark, and then a gigantic penis. So it's super, super, taboo breaking. And then you get this gothic, romantic story by Charles Fess, which is a little bit like a fable. Very moody. I mean, it's hard not to like his art. It's very refined. It's very detailed. The story flow is perfect. He's a very good storyteller. He knows which moments to emphasize. But it's not a particular interesting story. And it kind of breaks the mood, this very edgy mood that the whole anthology started with. So I was very happy to get back into this more, indie feel, into the Cronenberg vibe. And by the way, Cronenberg is mentioned in like every second introduction. So everyone was very, very influenced by Cronenberg back in the 80s. And this story is drawn by Mike Hoffman, who I didn't know, but I really enjoyed his art. He's the artist of 2 stories here. And the story is by Tom Sniegoski, who I know from some Punisher issues that I've read, I don't know when. And it's a very, very weird story. It's a little bit of it has something of a Daniel Klaus. The art also has something of Daniel Klaus, this guy here, as he's walking down the street. And the way the story is told, so we have this handwritten captions were in his head, and I like that. I like this kind of more literary approach, because you get a better feel of the character. Some people say show everything on the page, show it in the drawings, don't explain it. But no, I think this adds up very, very nicely here. It's not doing what Marvel Comics or DC Comics did back in the day, where you read in the captions what you see on the page already. But it's a nice contrast. So yeah, this guy is very poor, and he gets the opportunity to earn some money, and he gets into the hands of this very, very, very dubious dentist. And this guy puts our man to sleep, and he's stealing his teeth to give them to this weird monster here. So yeah, it's very Klausian in a way. I don't know. I really liked this one. It was very cool. And talking about Klaus, there is another giant of the indie scene which emerged in the 80s but really came into fruition in the 90s, and it's of course Charles Burns. And this is very interesting because it's a very short story. It's 4 pages, but it's like a Charles Burns resume of sorts, the comics resume. Everything that you need to know about him and everything that makes him amazing is here. Of course, the art, obviously, it's incredible. It's hyper precise. A lot of time goes into each and every panel. Every composition is flawless. Some really neat ideas, He's talking about the pain in his head, and this is how he shows the pain. He's talking about a dream where parts don't come together. He can't remember it properly, and you see here this thing that can only be done in comics. There is no way that you can explain this panel in words or can shoot it on film. Not possible. And of course, it's about a disease, an infectious disease, which gets transmitted through sexual intercourse. So yeah, if you think that you've heard about the story before, it's exactly Black Hole. But this is 7 years before Black Hole, and that was very, very interesting. It's kind of a prelude or a preview of what Charles Burns wants to achieve, wants to go for. Yeah, he's already a master here, and he takes another 7 years until the first issue of Black Hole is being released. So the next one is okay, this one. I don't think I have to go deep into every story. This is one which I found very by the numbers. It's again a guy arriving in the city, renting a room, and sitting in front of the television again, and seeing weird stuff in the television. Well, okay. Also the art, I wasn't like very impressed by it. Bernie Miro, I didn't know him, and I'm not very much interested in finding out more. Okay, next is another by the numbers story by Jack Butterworth and Cam Kennedy. Cam Kennedy of Judge Dredd fame. The art is decent, of course, but the story is, it's this guy who hates his wife, kills her, cuts out her eyes, but then is haunted by ice. And yeah, that's the story. So you didn't need to be a genius in the mid-80s to hang out with the coolest people in the business and releasing in the hottest magazine that there was, it seems. Okay, again, a story drawn by Mike Hoffman, which I really enjoyed. And I've looked him up. Mike Hoffman is still making comics. He had a successful Kickstarter campaign, which just wrapped up a few weeks ago, I think, or even like days ago. A bit sad that I didn't know about him a month ago. I would have backed it because I really enjoyed his art here. And yes, the writer is Tim Lucas, who's not a proper comics writer. He seems to be a film guy more, a film critic, a film scholar, and he knows his David Cronenberg again. But it's not so much Cronenberg, but more like a very weird French movie about a guy who's obsessed with a film he's seeing in a adult theater. And it's not a normal porn movie, but the fetish of that is presented in this film, it's about women's throats. And it's not what you're thinking. Nothing goes into the throat, okay? It's not that kind of fetish. It's really the throat itself, the neck. Beautifully illustrated here. This is something which a novel has a hard time doing. Creating this luring effect to achieve this sensuality. And I think Mike Hoffman does a fantastic job of introducing this weird fetish, and it really made me interested in checking out necks more. So I have to tell my wife about it. She will be very intrigued by it, I'm sure. So yeah, this guy, after this basically initiation in the adult theater, now sees his wife in a different way, and really it's changing his whole life. One afternoon in the adult theater. So let this be a lesson for you guys. I don't know if they even exist anymore, adult cinemas. Yeah, it's a beautiful, beautiful story. Unfinished. It's only the tease here. I don't know if it will be continued in the next issues, but I know that the writer released it as a novel later on, I think in '95, and now I'm a bit curious to read it. Okay, this one here is by Eddie Campbell, who I adore. He's the collaborator of Alan Moore in From Hell, but he's also a cartoonist in his own right. He had this series of books and issues which were autobiographical, collected in one big volume called Alec. And he also did a series called Bacchus, which I also very much enjoyed. But this year, I don't know, this was kind of a docu-fiction in the vein of the big books that Piranha Press used to release. You know, the big books of thieves, the big books of miracle workers, whatever. And this was like one story about an unidentified body and the weird happenstances around it. I didn't find it very intriguing and also not very taboo breaking in any way. And I have to say, you know, now we're closer to the end, and I'm also getting closer to my verdict, which is that, this story, by the way, is by Stephen Bissett. The story is I don't even have to explain it. Just look at the pictures. They're much more interesting than the so-called story in here. But I have to say the covers were a little bit of a fake package, because this wasn't the most daring thing I've ever read. That's for sure. Well, maybe except for this particular story here, which, it's by Keith Giffen. The story and the pictures, the words by Robert Lauren Fleming. I don't know the second guy. Keith Giffen, you know, he became a mainstream. He was already a mainstream artist and storyteller, working at DC for so many books. But here he gets into his weirdest and creepiest. It's sexually loaded story. Not easy to decipher graphically, as you can see here, but I think that's interesting because this page really works as a kind of a maze, and you have to find out what's happening. And I'm also not completely sure what's happening. I only know that all options are very, very, very perverse and very dark and very weird. And I won't explain it. I won't tell you what it's about, because I want to stay family friendly here, but it was very dark, and I liked it, of course. I wanted to have something very dark and very daring. One of my favorite cartoonists ever, Chester Brown. I've released a video on him a few years ago. You can check it out. This is very early Chester Brown, 86. Yummy Fur, his legendary series, was only in its very early stage. Issue 4 or 5 was just released. And this is also, I don't know, it's this dark, cutesy, weirdo stuff that prevails to this day, not in his work, but in the work of many, many other artists. Yes, Chester Brown maybe is one of the better performers in that subgenre, but I wasn't that impressed, and I didn't find this to be a very strong closing to the whole anthology. Well, maybe that's a better closing before we come to the Holocaust. So if you found this interesting, entertaining, whatever, tell me, and I will continue to review them. I have a few more in my collection, and I'm also a bit curious to find out how this title evolves. By the way, my curiosity was sparked by an interview that James Tynion IV gave regarding his own horror anthology that he's releasing right now, Razor Blades. I backed it on Gumroad. Check it out. It looks really interesting. And he said that, well, this Taboo series was a big influence on him. And I just wish more stories would have been in the vein of the cover. But anyways, I love the format. A lot of great artists in here. But like maybe every anthology that ever was and ever will be, not every story can be golden. All right, thanks a lot for watching and listening. I hope you liked it. If so, please subscribe if you haven't yet. Hit the notification button to be notified when I release new videos. And see you soon. Bye-bye.